and welcome to Arbitral Insights, a podcast series brought to you by our international arbitration practice lawyers here at Reed Smith. I'm Peter Rosher, Global Head of Reed Smith's International Arbitration Practice. I hope you enjoy the industry commentary, insights and anecdotes we share with you in the course of this series, wherever in the world you are. If you have any questions about any of the topics discussed, please do contact our speakers. And with that, let's get started.
Welcome back to the next episode of Arbitral Insights, in which we'll discuss the American Arbitration Association with Jeff Zaino, who's the Vice President of the AAA's Commercial Division. I'm JP Duffy. I'm an international arbitration partner based in New York that acts as both counsel and arbitrator in international arbitration seated around the world under a variety of governing laws and arbitral rules. I'm qualified in New York, England, and Wales, and the DIFC courts in Dubai, where I previously lived and practiced. I routinely represent clients in arbitrations involving a range of issues and frequently sit as an arbitrator in commercial disputes as well. I also have the good fortune to be a member of the AAA's Commercial Division arbitrator roster, the ICDR panel, and I'm a member of the AAA-ICDR Life Sciences Steering Committee and a member of the ICDR Publications Committee as well. So I get to do a lot with the AAA, which is really a wonderful organization. As I mentioned, with me today is Jeff Zaino, who's the Vice President of the Commercial Division of the AAA in New York. He oversees administration of the large, complex commercial caseload, user outreach, and panel of commercial neutrals in New York. He joined the association in 1990, and Mr. Zaino is dedicated to promoting ADR methods and services. He's also written and published extensively on the topics of electronic reform in ADR, including several podcasts with the ABA, Talks on Law, and Corporate Counsel Business, and he's appeared on CNN, MSNBC, and Bloomberg to discuss national election reform efforts and the Help America Vote Act. He was deemed a 2018 Alternative Dispute Resolution Champion by the National Law Journal and received awards for his ADR work from the National Academy of Arbitrators, Region 2, and Long Island Labor and Employment Relations Association. In 2022, Jeff received the Alicott Lieber Younger Committee of the Year Award for the New York State Bar Association Commercial and Federal Litigation Section, and in 2023, the Chairman's Award, NYSBA Dispute Resolution Section. So as you can tell, Jeff is a highly experienced, highly lauded arbitration expert. We're really lucky to have his valuable insights today. So before we begin with some of the substance, let me just give a little bit of background on the AAA and the commercial division so that those that are less familiar have a little bit of information about what we're going to discuss today. The AAA is a nonprofit alternative dispute resolution service provider headquartered in New York that administers arbitrations, mediations, and other forms of dispute resolution, such as ombudsperson and dispute avoidance training. It was founded in 1926 to provide an alternative to civil court proceedings, and that makes the AAA one of the oldest arbitral institutions in the world, as well as one of the largest, having administered over 11,553 business-to-business cases in 2023 alone, with a total value of over $19.1 billion. So that should give you a pretty good idea of the scope of what the AAA does. Notably, the AAA has several divisions that offer users substantial subject matter expertise. For instance, the Commercial Division, which Jeff heads, specializes in business-to-business disputes of all sizes, but has a particular expertise with large, complex cases across a variety of industries, including accounting, communications, energy, entertainment, financial services, franchise, hospitality, insurance and reinsurance, life sciences, sports, and technology. There are also separate AAA divisions that focus exclusively on construction issues, consumer disputes, employment matters, government issues, healthcare, and labor disputes. Lastly, as many of our listeners will know, the AAA has a well-known international division, the International Center for Dispute Resolution, or what's colloquially known as the ICDR, that focuses on disputes that have an international component. Before we get into some of our recent developments, Jeff, if you could tell us a bit about what makes the AAA different than other arbitral administrators, I'm sure our audience would love to hear that.
Sure. Hey, thanks so much, JP, for having me today, and thanks for the kind words at the beginning. It's great to be here today. Well, you mentioned it. The AAA is the largest and oldest ADR provider in the world. We have over 700 staff worldwide and 28 offices, including one in Singapore. And we have a huge panel and you're on that panel. We have 6,000 arbitrators on our panel, and we consider them experts in the industry, and we're really proud of our panel. And like you mentioned, we're hitting our 100th anniversary in 2026. And since then, when I started in the 90s, like you mentioned, 1990. From 1926, when we were founded, to 1990, we did 1 million cases, 1 million cases. And then, since then, from 1990 until now, 2024, we hit 8 million cases. So it's growing. And I feel that's because of AAA ICDR. Again, we've been around for almost 100 years, and we keep on growing. And I feel that we took the A out of ADR. I mean, everyone says alternative dispute resolution, but I really think now and you'll probably agree with me, JP, that it's dispute resolution. It's something in our toolbox, and it's not alternative any longer. And then another thing about us, a huge difference about AAA ICDR, is we're not for profit. That makes us unique in this space. Profit-based companies are a little bit different than what we are. Not criticizing them, but we're unique in the sense that we work directly for the parties, not for the arbitrators.
That's a really interesting stat, Jeff. Let me unpack some of that, because I think,
Sure.
First off, if I understood that correctly, you said up until 1990 there were 1 million cases administered. Is that right?
That's correct. We did 1 million cases from our founding, 1926, a year after the Federal Arbitration Act in 1925. So we did 1 million when I came on board in 1990. And then from 1990 until now, we've done a total of 8 million. So we doubled that. I mean, or tripled it. I mean, it's been amazing how the growth that we've seen. And also during pandemic, we saw a huge growth at AAA ICDR.
Now, Jeff, one thing that I think you're obviously very involved with the New York State Bar, and I've done quite a bit with the New York State Bar myself over the years. One thing that I noticed, and you just reminded me of this, was an uptick in submission agreements during the pandemic, by which I mean parties taking existing disputes for which there was no arbitration clause, drafting an arbitration clause for it to submit it and move it into arbitration. And I think some of that was a function of, the recognition that disputes would founder if the courts were closed, and that
Sure.
parties needed things done. Did you see that kind of growth during the pandemic of submission agreements as well?
Absolutely. And the courts were shut down, like you mentioned, for 3 to 4 months worldwide. And the ADR providers, like the AAA ICDR, did not shut down. And we did have submissions, more submissions than we've ever seen. And usually it's only about, I would say, 2%, 3% of our caseload is submissions. But we saw the court systems. And I had over $1 billion case, a bankruptcy case, that came to us from Texas. And it was mediated. We had 2 mediators, one in Connecticut and one in Texas. We had 6 parties. 40 people showed up on the Zoom, JP. It was amazing. And that was a submission to AAA through the court system. The judge talked to the parties and said, listen, we're shut down. This is an important matter. Why don't you go to AAA? And so, yes, we did see submissions during the pandemic. I'm not sure if that's going to continue on. Most of our disputes are, creatures of contract, as you know.
Yeah, that's always going to be the case in arbitration, right? That the vast majority of cases will be pre-dispute arbitration, subject to a pre-dispute arbitration clause. But I think it's really interesting when you see submission agreements like that, because I think it's a clear recognition that, one, arbitration is a really valuable tool, and two, it's a real plus for the AAA and a real nod of confidence that those are submitted to AAA, because that's parties taking something they know has to be figured out and saying, all right, AAA is the guy to do it. I wanted to pick up too on that exponential growth of 8 million cases between 1990 and the present versus 1 million over the first, what is that, 70 something years or 60 plus years?
60 plus years, absolutely. Yeah.
What are there particular industries that you've seen, significant growth in since the 1990 period that you were discussing, between 1990 and the present? Are there particular industries that you are seeing more growth in, or that you think there could be more growth in? Just be curious to get your views on that.
Sure. In my area of commercial, as you know, because you're on the commercial panel and the ICDR panel, is healthcare. And I know you're a big part of healthcare. Also, financial services. We've seen a huge growth in that in the last 5 years. We put together an advisory committee for financial services, on insurance. And then also, as you probably know, consumer. We saw a big amount of consumer cases during the pandemic and even prior to the pandemic. And that's a big caseload. It's about 30% of our caseload at AAA-ICDR. But again, people, criticize that sometimes and say, well, that's not fair to the consumer. They're forced into arbitration. But what I say, JP, to law students, and when I speak at events like this, I say, listen, we don't draft ourselves into contracts. AAA-ICDR does not do that. People draft us into contracts. And we just try to make the process, we try to level the playing field. And we do a lot of consumer, but we do a lot of high-end commercial cases, as you know, a lot of international cases and things like that. But the two areas I would say, to a long-winded answer to your question, JP, is I would say healthcare and financial services, insurance. That's where we're seeing a lot of growth. And also technology.
Wow, those are, the consumer aspect is one that is obviously very, very, very hot right now, given things like the mass arbitration rules and things like that. And we will probably touch on that in a bit. But, it's a really valuable service to provide. And that's one thing that I think the AAA really does well. And as you mentioned, it's a not-for-profit organization. It's not an organization that's out to make money off of consumer disputes. It's really there to help everybody resolve them. So something for everyone to keep in mind.
The company bears the cost, not the consumer. And I hope people know that we're not out, like you said, we're not out to make a big buck on this. We're just trying to level the playing field and access to justice for these people.
Yeah, and that's really what it is. At the end of the day, it's access to justice. And, a lot of times the alternative is small claims court, which is, not always a great choice. I've sat as an arbitrator in small claims court a few times, and I can tell you it's a great process when it works, but it can be a challenging process as well. So
without a doubt,
always something to keep in mind.
Yeah.
Well, let's talk then about some of the recent developments, because there have been quite a few. And as you mentioned, it's coming up on the centennial for the AAA-ICDR, and a lot has happened, obviously, in the 100 years of its existence, almost 100 years of its existence.
Sure.
And quite a few of those things are pretty monumental. And one of the biggest ones, I guess, is that in February 2023, Bridget McCormick took over as president and CEO of the AAA-ICDR from India Johnson, who was in that role for a lot of years. Bridget was previously the Chief Justice of the Michigan Supreme Court, if I'm correct, and was also a professor and associate dean at the prestigious University of Michigan Law School. So she brings a pretty extensive wealth of experience to the AAA. Now that she's been in that role for about a year and a half, how have things been different at the AAA-ICDR under Bridget's leadership?
It's been wonderful. I mean, Bridget brings such life to the company right now. I mean, India Johnson was great. She put our house in order, our finances, but Bridget is now doing a wonderful job in getting out there. I'm not sure, JP, have you met her yet?
I have not had the pleasure of meeting her in person, but I'll sort of preview for our listeners that we are in the process of trying to get Bridget into our firm to talk to everyone about what the AAA-ICDR does and give sort of an insider's view for our partners.
Oh, wonderful. She's such a dynamic speaker. If you go on YouTube, you'll see she speaks all the time. It's amazing. Whenever I ask her to speak at an event in New York, I feel bad about asking her because I know how busy she is. But she does agree, but I have to find a space in her calendar because if you see on LinkedIn, I know you're on LinkedIn too, JP, and she is everywhere. It seems like every week she's speaking somewhere, very dynamic, and she embraces AI. And I know we're going to talk about AI a little bit, but also innovation. And she's been doing such a terrific job being the face of the AAA, and we needed that. India, again, did a wonderful job, but Bridget is out there and around the world doing international events, doing events here domestically. And it really, I think, is getting the word out there about ADR and about, well, I should say dispute resolution, and also access to justice, being a former Chief Justice of the Supreme Court of Michigan, doing a terrific job. And really, the people in the company are very excited. We have 700 plus employees, and we're excited with our new president. It really has been a great time with her.
It's funny. The one thing I've universally heard from anyone who works there when I ask about Bridget is, everyone says great energy, great leadership, and really, really, really strong presence, which is really wonderful to hear because you seem to be echoing that pretty strongly as well.
Yeah, without a doubt. I mean, when she works a room, when she talks at an event, and it's great. We're forward-looking right now, big time. The AAA now is AAA-ICDR is looking towards the future with innovation, with ODR, and we're going to talk about that, and with access to justice, which I love. And she's doing a terrific job.
Well, that's great to hear. And I think, we are going to talk about ODR.com in just a second. But before we do that, I'd just be curious because they may well be the same thing. But what would you say Bridget's greatest accomplishment is so far?
I would say being the face of the AAA and embracing new ideas. For years, we didn't really, we move kind of slowly. We embrace new ideas, but we move slowly, like a battleship turning around or a aircraft carrier turning around. We move slowly. We're not doing that any longer. Bridget wants to move on quickly, and which is great, and embrace things that are going on. I think we're ahead of the curve on a lot of things, with acquiring ODR, with our embracing AI, with her ideas about innovation, access to justice. We are, I think, really ahead of the curve with respect to these areas, ahead of law firms, ahead of some of our competitors. And I attribute that to Bridget.
That's really great to hear. And, it's really hard with a large organization to be nimble.
Exactly.
I know we do that pretty well at Reed Smith, I think, too, but it's a challenge. And it does require great leadership in order to get everybody on board with that. So it's wonderful to hear that's happening at the AAA-ICDR, and you see it.
Oh, yeah, without a doubt. And also, we're almost 100-year-old organizations. So you would think that we wouldn't be thinking about these innovation things and in the future, but we are, which is terrific. We're an old organization, but not really. We're ready for the future.
Well, let's talk about that future a bit because it's clear that there's a strong focus on that. And one of the first things that I noticed is, the ODR.com Resourceful Internet Solutions acquisition. So for those that don't know anything about that, maybe you could fill the audience in and give us a bit of background about that one and what it's done for the AAA-ICDR.
Sure. We just recently, a few months ago, acquired ODR.com. It's a company that's been around for approximately 25 years, online dispute resolution that can be completely customized for your needs for online dispute resolution. And they've been doing a wonderful job for many years. Okay. Obviously, much smaller than the AAA-ICDR, but they've been working with us. I'm not sure if you know this, JP, but they've helped us with our no-fault business in New York. They helped us set up our system initially years ago. So we've had a relationship with them for probably 2 decades with ODR. So we recently acquired them and we're working with them. Their most important area is right now is mediation. They have mediate.com, and we're looking at our mediation.org and combining those two. Okay. And we want to expand our mediation business. And again, I mentioned it a couple of times, access to justice. We want high volume cases. Okay. We do obviously high end cases, high dollar cases, but right now we're seeing with ODR.com, we can spread the business, we can grow the business, and we can expand our mediation business. And that's what we're trying to do because mediation is growing, as you know, JP. Mediation has grown tremendously over the last couple of decades. But now with ODR, online dispute resolution, I mean, it's going to really grow, I think. So that's why we acquired it. And, Colin Rule, I'm not sure, JP, if you've ever met Colin Rule, the head of ODR.com.
I have not had the pleasure.
Yeah, he's phenomenal. If anyone that's listening to this podcast, you just Google Colin Rule. He's been in the space for many, many years, and he's a phenomenal person. And I'm really excited about this acquisition, and I think we're going to work so well together.
Well, now, Jeff, just for people like me that are a little bit less savvy with how some of these things work technologically and sort of mechanically, is ODR.com and mediate.com is a function of that, right, or a part of that?
Yes, it's a part of it. Yeah, and they have, I believe they have arbitration.com, but now it's going to be merged in with the AAA, and the platform of ODR.com is going to be used for our mediation services at AAA for online mediation services.
Okay, that's what I was getting at. So this is like a platform where users or parties and the mediator all log in, communicate with each other, exchange their positions, and do everything that way. So is it correct to say it's sort of a virtual mediation platform?
Yeah, without a doubt. And now the timing is perfect, JP, because we just came off the pandemic about a couple of years ago, and we were seeing, as you probably know, as an arbitrator at AAA, we were doing thousands of virtual hearings, arbitration, and also mediation, and it worked. It really worked.
Yeah, well, it's and that's really one of the true benefits that came out of the pandemic, in my view. Prior to the pandemic, I had always done certain aspects of cases virtually, and there was video conferencing was something that you could suggest, but that parties and frankly arbitrators were not always that willing to embrace. But I think the pandemic really showed everyone that you can do things virtually efficiently, cost effectively, and in a way that you don't need an in-person hearing for, and that it can be really successful. So I'm sure the timing has been right for ODR.com and that acquisition. In terms of integrating it, what's the full timeline for getting it fully integrated, if you don't mind my asking?
Sure. Well, I mean, right now we're focusing on mediation. Okay, that's going to be our focus for the next several months. And then I think we're going to try to see if we can move this into arbitration also, because we're still seeing a lot of arbitrations, not a lot. I mean, I would say that 30% of our arbitrations are still being done in the virtual world. We're starting to see in JP, you've been at my Midtown office in Midtown Manhattan on 42nd Street, and we're starting to see about 60 to 70% capacity as an in-person for arbitration. But there's still a segment that wants to do it in the virtual world. And this is where ODR.com comes into play. And right now, but the focus right now is mediation and working with our mediation team at the AAA-ICDR.
Got it. Well, it's funny. I have an employment partner who told me the odds of them ever doing an employment mediation below a certain value in person again are slim to none.
Interesting.
Yeah, and I think you guys have really hit the nail on the head with this.
Well, with labor, labor similar to employment, we're seeing almost 80% of labor cases now in New York City, I'm talking, are being done virtual, maybe even a little bit more than that. They got so used to doing it in the virtual world for labor cases, union management. It's interesting to see where we're going with this. But commercial type disputes, the type that you handle, JP, we're starting to see more people coming back into in person. However, we're not seeing the days of a witness flying in from Paris for 1 hour, because we have all the technology at the office, our offices around the country, the voice activated cameras. So we don't need to ship in people for 1 hour. It's a waste of money.
Yeah, and that's really the great thing that this technology allows for, which is, I just did to mention the hearing space, Jeff, I just did a pretty large week-long hearing earlier in the year at the AAA's offices on 42nd Street, and it was great. But there were, and I do, myself prefer in person for certain things, but during that hearing, we had witnesses that were exactly what you're describing, really only required to confirm a few issues or give, a short cross-examination, and they were located in pretty diverse regions. Absolutely no reason to incur the time or expense, or frankly, just the headache of bringing those people in from around the world for scheduling purposes and everything else. Sure. So we did those witnesses virtually, and that's a real benefit. You sort of do that hybrid approach, and you can save. It's way more efficient. It's way more cost effective, and it is just easier from a scheduling perspective. So this is a really great development.
Yeah, and JP, have you noticed, I mean, when you were probably at my office on 42nd Street, we have now the big monitors, and I've noticed that arbitrators like yourself and advocates like yourself are using more technology in the rooms. We have these cupboards in our hearing rooms where the binders used to go, the big binders for exhibits and things like that. No longer am I seeing that. Most arbitrators are now using we provide iPads. We have the big monitors, and it seems like people are going away from paper, which is great too.
Yeah, it's funny. I'm sort of like probably the last of the Mohicans where people really had to do things like mini books. Like when I was a real junior associate, we would have hearing bundles that were in mini book form, and they were, you'd have 55 volumes and everything would be in there. And there's sort of those nightmare stories where parties would spend hundreds of thousands of dollars just pulling together the paper for a hearing. And that to me always seemed a little bit crazy. In this day and age, it is totally unnecessary. I would much prefer to have everything electronically, and that hearing space really allows for that. So really, really great to hear that parties are embracing that, because it's such a cost savings and it's an efficiency.
Absolutely.
It just doesn't need to be the way it was.
Sure.
Well, let's talk then a bit about some of the AI stuff that you were mentioning, because sure. I think that is really, I have to confess, I don't understand it as well as I should. I think most people, if they were being honest, probably have an inkling of what it does, but don't really know. I'd love to hear what the AAA-ICDR is doing with AI, because it's a really, really, really groundbreaking development.
Absolutely. Well, if you Google Bridget McCormick, our president, she speaks on AI quite frequently, and it really has embraced it. And how have we embraced it at AAA? Well, she encourages the staff to use it, and we have. She's even recommended certain programs that we should use. But with respect to how are we using it with respect to running our business? Well, we have Clause Builder, and you know about Clause Builder. It's a tool that it was developed in 2013, where people can go online and develop a clause for arbitration. Now we have Clause Builder AI, which, as opposed to going through various modules with the original Clause Builder, you can just type in, I want an employment clause, I want 3 arbitrators, I want limited discovery, and the Clause Builder AI will build that clause for you. That's something we just rolled out. Also for arbitrators, scheduling orders. We have an AI program right now for arbitrators, where a scheduling order usually takes an arbitrator, and you can correct me if I'm wrong, JP, usually about an hour to 2 hours after you do the preliminary hearing. Well, now AI reduces that time to probably a couple of minutes for an arbitrator. So we rolled that out. And we're having discussions about low dollar cases, high volume cases. Can AI be used? And we're looking into that. We haven't rolled that out yet. It's not going to eliminate you, JP, but it's something that we're looking at right now. And we are embracing it. I use it for various things. I'll give you an example. I use it for, if I'm doing an educational program, I'll type in, I'm doing a program on arbitration and discovery. Can you give me a good title for this program? Because I've been doing this for years, and I've used a lot of different titles for programs, and it's wonderful to use AI for those purposes and for editing things. So I like the fact that our company embraces it. Some companies do not. Some law firms, as you know, JP, do not embrace AI. And we had that case last year where I think an attorney, it wasn't arbitration, it was litigation, where he cited cases through AI that never existed.
Yeah, that's actually happened more than once since then, and it's been kind of amazing to me. Yeah, it's funny. We as a law firm at Reed Smith have definitely embraced AI. Where we've got a person who's sort of C-suite level that addresses that and that heads that function up, and I know we are trying to bring it in much more for things that are sort of routine, that don't require necessarily like true attorney time.
Sure.
And it is a real game changer. I mean, anybody who doesn't get on board with AI is going to get left behind at some point, because it is truly, truly the wave of the future, in my view.
Oh, absolutely. You know what it is? The way I look at it, people say, well, it seems scary or whatever. But, well, what about Google Maps and things that we've embraced years ago? I couldn't live, JP, without Google Maps. I think so. That's technology that it's going to help us. It's not going to take us over or whatever. It's going to help us enhance what we're doing.
Yeah, I think the concerns about Skynet are a little bit, Skynet and Terminator are a little bit far-fetched, but it is something that we all need to get on board with. It's a lot like the way that, when I first started practicing, the notion of uploading paper documents to be reviewed and then using search terms was really scary for a lot of people, but that became commonplace, and
Absolutely.
You couldn't function without it. This will do the same thing to the extent it's not the same. Now, Jeff, what's the overlap, if any, between some of the AI initiatives and ODR.com?
We're not really combining those yet, but I think we will. There's discussions about it, but right now we're focusing on mediation with ODR.com, and we're discussing rolling out AI with various things to assist our arbitrators, our mediators. But I think eventually, there'll be a combination, I think. But right now, there's not.
Got it. Well, we'll stay tuned, because I can't imagine those two things are going to stay in separate houses for too long. Well, we could talk all day about what's going on at the AAA-ICDR right now, because it's just amazing. I mean, it's really incredibly, incredibly dynamic at the moment. But what I'd like to do is sort of shift ahead to looking ahead to the future. We talked a bit earlier about how the AAA is rapidly approaching its centennial anniversary. And that's kind of a natural reflection point for any organization. If you were to sort of sum things up and say, what accomplishments from its first century of existence that the AAA is most proud of, what do you think you would point to?
Well, I would point to two things. First, how amazing the AAA ICDR was, and also other ADR providers when pandemic hit. Within a week, we were up with 700 employees doing thousands and thousands of cases. And I was worried about the arbitrators, not you, JP, but other arbitrators with the technology. And our 6,000 arbitrators, it was flawless. It was amazing or seamless. It really went well. And that I'm very, very proud of because I had been with the AAA for a long time prior to that. And I was really concerned that the arbitrators weren't going to get it, weren't going to be able to understand Microsoft Teams, Zoom, all that kind of stuff. So we did a great job during pandemic. We had some of our best years during pandemic with respect to helping society in arbitrating cases, but also some of the things that we've done for state and federal governments, state and federal government. Storm Sandy, Katrina. Those are the things I'm very proud of. I was a part of the Storm Sandy stuff where we administered 6,000 cases for homeowners and with insurance companies, and we were able to do that very quickly. And we're a not-for-profit, so the federal government and the state governments look at us and will hire us to do those kind of projects, and we can quickly mobilize because of our staff. So those two things really stand out in my career at AAA.
That's a really, really interesting thing to point to because that is truly embodies the best that the AAA can offer. It's an incredible service that really help people with real life issues during really challenging times. So wonderful to hear. What would you see for the next 100 years in the AAA? Looking forward, I know it's going to be it's going to be having its bicentennial at some point.
Sure.
It will absolutely occur. What would you see as, if you were to fast forward yourself 100 years and still be in the seat, because by then technology will have kept us all alive for the next 100 years, and you're Jeff Zaino 2.0 sitting around in 200 years, where would you see the AAA-ICDR at that point?
Well, I'm on part of the committee for the 100-year anniversary. We have a committee already formed 2 years in advance to get ready for our 100th-year anniversary, and we're talking about this stuff. And I think some of the themes that Bridget's talking about, access to justice, I think we're going to be. We saw from 1990 to now 8 million cases. We're going to see far more. We're going to see the public now embracing arbitration. When I was hired by the AAA in the 90s, I didn't even know what AAA stood for. I mean, with the name American Arbitration Association, I didn't know what arbitration was. We are reaching out to law schools. We're doing collaboration with a lot of law schools in New York and throughout the country, throughout the world. And I think the word's going to get out there that arbitration is the way to go. Our mediation is too. And I'm excited about that. Also, we're going to see far more diversity at AAA and also in the community. And that's something that we really care about at the AAA. Right now, JP, as you probably know, any list that goes out at the AAA is a minimum of 30% diverse. So we're going to see an increase in that area, but also access to justice for the public.
Really, really great. And I think we will all watch with rapt attention to see what happens because it's only good things in the future for the AAA-ICDR, that's for sure. Well, Jeff, I just want to thank you. But before we wrap this up, I'm going to reserve my right to bring you back for another podcast because there's so much more we could talk about.
Absolutely.
But is there anything I missed that we should hit on now that would be great for the audience to hear? I know there's just so much going on.
Well, I hope the audience, when in 2026, when we have our 100th anniversary, I hope people participate in it because we're going to do things worldwide and we're going to be doing events everywhere. And that year we have a huge team of people that are working on our 100th year anniversary, and not to just necessarily promote AAA-ICDR, but to promote arbitration and mediation. And that's what we're going to be doing in 2026. And I'm very excited about it.
You heard it here first, folks. Arbitration is the future, and Jeff Jeff said it himself. So we will definitely watch closely. Well, good. And just to give a very quick preview on this one too, because Jeff, you mentioned it, we are going to in the future have your colleagues from the ICDR side of the house come on, and we're going to bring some of the new folks from Singapore and a few other people. So more to come, and it's just incredible to see.
We look forward to it, and JP, I would love to have another sit down with you. It's been great.
Good. We absolutely will. So that then will conclude our discussion of the American Arbitration Association for now. And I want to thank our guest, Jeff Zaino of the AAA Commercial Division, for his invaluable insights. And I want to thank you, the audience, for listening today. You should feel free to reach out to Reed Smith about today's podcast with any questions you might have. And you should absolutely as well feel free to reach out to Jeff. I know he's super responsive and he would love to chat with you directly if you have any questions. And we look forward to having you tune in for future episodes of the series, including future updates with Jeff and our podcast with the ICDR as well. So thank you, everyone, and we will be back.
Arbitral Insights is a Reed Smith production. Our producers are Allie McCardle and Shannon Ryan. For more information about Reed Smith's global international arbitration practice, email arbitralinsights@reedsmith.com. To learn about the Reed Smith Arbitration Pricing Calculator, a first-of-its-kind mobile app that forecasts the cost of arbitration around the world, search Arbitration Pricing Calculator on reedsmith.com or download for free through the Apple and Google Play app stores. You can find our podcast on podcast streaming platforms, reedsmith.com, and our social media accounts at ReedSmith LLP. This podcast is provided for educational purposes. It does not constitute legal advice and is not intended to establish an attorney-client relationship, nor is it intended to suggest or establish standards of care applicable to particular lawyers in any given situation. Prior results do not guarantee a similar outcome. Any views, opinions, or comments made by any external guest speaker are not to be attributed to Reed Smith LLP or its individual lawyers. All rights reserved.